There are some stories in Appalachia that don't disappear. They just stop being spoken. They sit in the void between the hollers, in the pauses during conversations, in the way certain roads feel darker than others at night. This story begins on a late summer September night, in a place meant for music and fun, and it ends in tragedy. This is Roots and Shadows, the Real Appalachia, where every root tells a story and every shadow hides one. Before we begin, a content warning. This episode contains discussion of violence, murder, and trauma. Listener discretion is advised. In Appalachia, nestled between the hills and valleys, lies Smyth County, a scenic rural county in southwestern Virginia's Appalachian foothills, known for its small-town charm, outdoor recreation, and historic communities. Here, the mountains don't rush you. They don't hurry the sunrise. They don't hurry the fog off the ridges. And they don't hurry the truth either. That's something you learn growing up here. In the early 1970s, life moved at a slower pace. People worked hard during the week in the furniture factories and the textile mills, but the weekends were for errands, church suppers, and if you were young, dances at the American Legion Hall. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't dangerous. It was just where people went. And on those nights, cars lined the parking lot. The sound of music leaked out into the dark. Fiddles, guitars, drums, accompanied by laughter. Teenagers danced the night away like the future was something you could step into. Parents trusted the town. They trusted the people. They trusted the mountain to keep watch over their loved ones. And one of those teens was Anna Mae Carter. On this Saturday night, she got dressed just like she had done many times before. Nothing flashy, just something nice. She fixed her hair, told her family where she was going, took one last look in the mirror, and ran out the door heading for a fun night on the town. She was only going to a dance. What could be the harm in that? But Anna Mae never made it home. At first, people assumed the normal things. Maybe she had stayed with a friend. Maybe she had caught a ride and didn't call. Communications were a little different back then. Calls from payphones and notes on the kitchen table were about the only options you had. But as the night stretched into morning, that uneasy feeling started to settle in. The one folks around here knew all too well. Something wasn't just right. Searches were started, quiet ones at first, mainly by family and friends. But as the searches grew larger, neighbors started talking, names started being mentioned, and rumors were circulating through the barber shops and the hair salons. But eventually, the truth came out. Not all at once, but in pieces. Anna Mae Carter had been found. However, it was not the outcome that anyone was hoping for. A few days after her disappearance, her body was found inside an abandoned house, not far from town. A place people drove by daily, without even giving it a second thought. Investigators would later testify that she had been strangled, found with a bedsheet knotted around her neck, and that her death was not the result of an accident or chance, but of human hands that cut off her breath and blood, leaving her in a place where no one was ever meant to find her. And the man responsible? He wasn't some stranger passing through. He wasn't that drifter you hear about. He wasn't that rumor we knew about. He wasn't the stereotype in the white van. No, he was from here. He was local. And his name was Lem Tuggle Jr. When people hear stories like this, they sometimes imagine monsters, something separate from normal life. They imagine these things only happen in other places, not here in Smyth County. You see, Lem had walked the same roads. He had heard the same music. He knew the same faces. And when he was arrested, tried, and convicted, the court handed down a sentence of 20 years in prison. 20 years. For Anna Mae's family, there was no sentence that could make sense of what they had lost, no number that could explain an empty chair at the table, or the bedroom left untouched, waiting for someone who would never return. But for the county, something had shifted, because when something like this happens in Appalachia, it doesn't erupt. It settles deep. There's a saying around here. You don't just come from a place, you carry it. In Appalachia, family trees aren't neat. They twist, they cross, they grow in directions nobody planned. And sometimes a branch grows heavy enough to bend everything around it. You see, Lem Tuggle was part of my bloodline. That's not something you announce. That's not something you're proud of. It's something you learn slowly in half-finished conversations, and the way certain names make a room go quiet. Growing up, I'd heard stories about coal mines, hard winters, and of people who were just barely getting by. But there were other stories, ones that trailed off, stopping just short of their endings. That's where Lem lived, in the pauses. And when he was sentenced to prison for Anna Mae Carter's murder, many people believed justice had been served. The law had spoken. The door had closed. And at the time, many people believed the story had reached its end. They believed the sentence was enough to bury the past. But they were wrong. Because in Appalachia, shadows just don't leave because you stop looking at them. For years, Lem's name stayed attached to ours, sometimes whispered, sometimes avoided altogether. And when word came that Lem was being released in early 1983, not because his sentence was complete, but through parole, there was no celebration, no relief, just a quiet unease. Because deep down, some people knew, but the courts didn't. Some shadows don't fade with time. They wait. On a Saturday night in May of 1983, just 4 months after Lem Tuggle was released from prison, Ruth Ellen Parker went to a dance at the American Legion Hall, the same place 12 years earlier where Anna Mae Carter had last been seen alive. Ruth, a middle-aged woman, a grandmother, someone who had lived long enough to believe she understood people. She was just looking to enjoy a fun evening with her friends. But little did she know, history was about to repeat itself. Lem showed up at the dance, introduced himself to Ruth using a made-up name, and danced the night away. And when the music had ended around 1 a.m. on Sunday morning, Ruth left with him, having no idea whose company she was really in. She told her friends that she needed to go straight home afterwards, and they assumed Lem was just giving her a ride. They saw her standing beside his car in the parking lot with the trunk open, and that was the last time any of her friends saw her. Not long after the dance was over, a Virginia state trooper stopped a car near 7 Mile Ford, Virginia, for weaving back and forth across the road. When the trooper approached the driver, it was Lem Tuggle behind the wheel. He found nothing to suggest intoxication, and Ruth was seated in the front passenger seat. After a brief interaction, the trooper allowed the car to continue on its way. That traffic stop would later take on a heavy significance. It was one of the last confirmed moments Ruth Ellen Parker was seen alive. Not in distress, and nothing obvious enough to trigger intervention by the trooper, Lem's car disappeared back into the darkness of the rural Smyth County roads. In the days that followed, her absence became impossible to ignore. A missing persons case was opened, and once again, the rumor mill started. Stories and speculations as to what happened to Ruth began swirling through the community. No one was really thinking about murder. Once again, people would gravitate towards the usual reasons, that they thought someone would disappear. 5 days later, in the early morning hours of June 2nd, 1983, an armed robbery occurred at a gas station in Chilhowie, Virginia, still in Smyth County, and the suspect fled in a black pickup truck with a camper top. The vehicle was spotted a short time later by the Virginia State Police just 2 counties away, and a traffic stop ensued. As the trooper approached the vehicle, the robbery suspect was identified, and it was Lem Tuggle Jr. Lem admitted to the robbery, showed the money to the trooper, and told him where the gun was located inside the vehicle. Lem was taken into custody for robbery. While being transported after his arrest, he volunteered information that he was connected to a missing persons case in Smyth County, Virginia, and he specifically mentioned Ruth Ellen Parker and told the officers they would have a long talk later. Later that same morning, after being advised of his rights, Lem directed Smyth County investigators to a remote area of the county where the body of Ruth Ellen Parker was found, clothing disturbed, evidence of assault, and a gunshot wound that ended her life. When Lem was arrested, there was no confusion, no guessing. He led police straight to her body. The evidence told a story no one wanted to hear twice. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment. It was a pattern. The trial that followed didn't take long. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony went largely uncontested, and the jury didn't struggle with its decision. Lem Tuggle Jr. was convicted of capital murder. This time, the sentence handed down by the Smyth County Court wasn't measured in years, because in 1984, the jury returned a guilty verdict, and Lem Tuggle Jr. was sentenced to death. For the families of the women whose lives were taken, no court sentence could restore what was lost. No verdict could undo the damage carved into generations. And for a while, it felt like something final had been spoken, like the shadow had finally been named, like the mountains could breathe again. But court sentences are rarely definitive endings. They're only promises, and promises that depend on a justice system holding firm, and prison doors staying closed. And in Appalachia, people know better than most. Not every door stays shut. In the next episode, we'll talk about what happened after the conviction, about a place built to hold men the state said would never walk free again, about a night when something failed, quietly at first, and about what it felt like here at home when the shadow that people thought was buried started moving again. This has been Roots and Shadows, the Real Appalachia, where every root tells a story and every shadow hides one. As a reminder, these stories are drawn from public records, historical reporting, and conversations passed down through families, neighbors, and memories. Some names have been changed, and where the written record goes quiet, details have been carefully dramatized for storytelling.